So Jonah Hill is an actor, comedian, kind of like resident, like that guy in the movies, right? Like that's kind of a stick. Like, right? Am I right? Well, I think I'm
No, it
right.
used to be more so, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So he starts dating this girl who is a surfer. She's a coach. She has like, tens of thousands of followers on Instagram. She's not famous, but this is her niche. She's really into it. She's a very fit girl, very athletic. And he slides into her DMs and they start dating. And they apparently date for about a year or so. That has long since been broken up, okay? He already has another partner. He has a baby that he's either had or is about to have with this other partner. This surfer girl is in the past, and yet for whatever reason, over the past week, she decided that she needed to drop a bombshell on the internet and release their private text communications. And they have been sparking a conversation that I think both you and I are really very interested in. So I'm not going to read all of the text messages because she has literally released like dozens of their private communications. But the one that's getting the most traction, I will read. And it is a text from him to her where he writes, plain and simple, if you need surfing with men, boundaryless, inappropriate friendships with men, to model, to post pictures of yourself in a bathing suit, to post sexual pictures, friendships with women who are in unstable places and from your wild recent past beyond getting a lunch or coffee or something respectful, I am not the right partner for you. If these things bring to you a place of happiness, I support it and there will be no hard feelings. These are my boundaries for romantic partnership, my boundaries with you based on the ways these actions have hurt our trust. She posted this with the caption, see the misuse of the term boundaries. And she's gone on to insinuate that he was very controlling, abusive, that he basically like is a narcissist. She's just painted him to be a very, very bad guy. And I feel like the internet has been very split in its reaction to this. A lot of men have said these are just boundaries. He's doing nothing wrong. He's communicating his boundaries. And a lot of women have said, no, this is controlling. This is narcissistic. This is abusive. And women should, know about this and be prepared. And then other people, I think you and I included, have been like, why are you posting this online? Because it really does just seem to be a violation of privacy within the confines of a relationship that I think everyone is entitled to. I don't like the idea in society that we're getting to this point where if you're no longer friends with someone or if you have a breakup with someone, that you're then going to take your private communications and air them after the fact to try to paint that person in a certain light. You can be very selective about what you're putting out there. You can even edit screenshots. Shocker, I know, people, but you can't believe everything you see on the internet. And as a whole, unless there was like a criminal case or there was some actual instance of abuse or something that people really needed to know about, I just find this entire thing to be really not a great trajectory in our society. I don't want that to be the norm. I don't want to have to sit here and guard every text that I send. I already do that a little bit because I've worked with attorneys and they're like, put nothing in writing ever.
Yeah, I send voice notes to everyone now when I'm about to say something controversial.
I do too. I voice note all the time because I've been scared out of my mind for a minute about this, but it does feel to me that this is something that should have remained between them. But now that it's out there, I do want to prod the conversation a little bit more because I do think it's a learning moment perhaps. And I'm curious, Brad, before I weigh in, what was your reaction? Did you see this as a man as being abusive?
No, I think I don't. And I take umbrage to the way that Jonah Hill has been called a toxic man or an abuser or a controller over these texts where we don't know the side of the story. We don't know the full picture. We know we don't really know what was going on. We know her side of the story. I also have a huge red flag of why is she releasing this other than to attack him or start drama a long time after they're not together and he's moved on, he's got a new partner, he's having a baby. If it wasn't right for you and you moved on and you have some bitter feelings about it, okay, but it's like, just seems very petty and vindictive to go public. Now, I will say this. These are his boundaries that he lays out. These seem unreasonable, right? These do not seem like fair or reasonable boundaries to require of your romantic partner who is a surfer, who is trying to build a brand. But he's not saying like, you must do this. He's simply saying like, these are my boundaries and maybe we're not a good fit. And she should have just said, you're right, we're not a good fit. End of the relationship there. Instead, she went along with it completely voluntarily for everything we knew, just 2 years later, then release it and paint him as some sort of abuser, really. And she knows what she's doing. And that's really, I think, unfair to him to conflate him with all these Me Too men who really are abusive when he was setting expectations and boundaries that might have been unreasonable. But the response then is to say, all right, then I'm not the right fit for you, not to try to claim that he's being abusive by just saying, I don't want my partner to do these things. I'm not comfortable with these things. Now, a lot of people have pointed out that he met her on Instagram when she was a surfer, was posting photos of her surfing, and then added these expectations that were clearly not what she was already doing. And so it's like, well, hang on. If you're not comfortable with a woman surfing with a man, why are you sliding into the DMs of a wannabe like professional surfer or whatever? Obviously, they're going to surf with people of the opposite sex. So he certainly has some fair share of like blame here for being unreasonable in a lot of ways, but he's not an abuser. This is, at least from what we know, this is not abuse. This is overbearing. This is unreasonable. But it's simply, he's saying like, he even says like, I will love and support that path for you if we're not right. This is just what I'm looking for in a relationship. And, you know, that's how dating works, is like, you're trying to see if you are compatible with someone. And she should have simply said, you're right, we're not compatible. And he could find somebody who is okay with those unreasonable, what to me, it's subjective. What's reasonable, what's unreasonable. To me, it's unreasonable, but maybe somewhere out there is fine with that and does want to have this like ultra conservative, not in a political sense, like boundaries, and so be it. But I don't think I think he's getting a rough time of things. I think he's being kind of unfairly maligned. But I do think it is it is kind of crazy, some of the stuff he was saying, but it shouldn't have been published. There's no need for this, and he's getting a bad rap, in my opinion.
Whew. So I think there's so much to unpack here. I'm like, where do I even start? First and foremost, I think ever since the Me Too movement started, I've had a major issue with terms being conflated and there not being enough nuance in conversations, because there can be problematic behavior in relationships that is not assault, that is not abuse, and it can still have a word that is a disfavorable adjective, and it can still be discussed and something that we have a conversation about as men and women in society when it comes to dating relationships. But I really do think there's this tendency to dump everything into buckets that are really atrocious, right? Like, not assault and rape and abuse. These are really serious things that harm people, that rip their lives away from them, either emotionally or physically. And I don't think that it does victims a service to try to conflate things that are not. This story in particular does remind me a lot of the Aziz Ansari story that broke during the height of Me Too, where a girl came out and basically tried to say she'd been Me Too'd by Aziz. And it was like they had this like kind of awkward consensual sexual first date that sounded terrible and I would have left and not have participated in, but it wasn't abuse. It wasn't assault. And yet he got treated the same as like a Harvey Weinstein. This kind of reminds me of that, where like not every, bad thing or thing that's unpleasant that happens to you in a relationship rises to the level of like trauma, which is what she's trying to clearly paint the picture as. I think when I read this that, my first thought is I would never date somebody like this. I do understand why there is a tendency for people to rush to call this abuse, because what he is doing is a precursor to abuse. And I think that is very fair to say. Very controlling behavior, trying to isolate someone from their friends, trying to tell someone they cannot have any communication with the opposite gender, trying to police what somebody wears, how they are presented in public. All of these are 101 red flag behaviors that I think everybody should be very aware of, but women in particular, because we are more prone to being victims of domestic abuse. And again, this is not something I would allow in my relationship. As you pointed out, he pursued her based on who she was and then was trying to change those very basic things about herself and her career. I don't like that whatsoever. I think this is a tendency with men. You often see this perception in society that, controlling men want weak women. No, they often want strong, capable, successful women, and then they want to make them conform to them in their way of doing things. They want to knock them down a peg, or it's kind of like, women who chase the perpetual bachelors like Leonardo DiCaprio. They want the thrill of like being the one to change them. I see this happen a lot. I also see oftentimes men are very attracted to women who are, at the top of their game. They see somebody who's successful in whatever industry they're in, or who has a lot of followers, or who's really pretty, or who's just like, life of the party. And they're like, I want to be with that girl. And they think that in obtaining them, it's going to give them status. And maybe like some of those traits are going to rub off on them. But then when they're having to be with them every day in and out, and they're having to kind of compare themselves to their partner and stack up next to them, they feel very bad about themselves. It makes them insecure, and they start to be threatened by the very things that attracted them to their partner in the first place. And that's what seems to have happened here in this situation with Jonah Hill, where it seems like he liked that she was posting in pictures with the bikinis and surfing and had a bunch of friends and was out and influencing and all this. And then all of a sudden he didn't like that, and it was making him insecure. And so I understand like that is something that we should, have a dialogue about. That's not abuse. And that has been my main issue with this whole conversation, is that is different than abuse. And, that might be his boundaries. And I think that you should look for people who have similar values to you. But these values are extreme, right? These are, there might be people in like very traditional Christian relationships that would say this is appropriate. And if that's something that you guys agree upon and you share those values, then you can live in that kind of relationship. I do think it's important for men to know that increasingly that is not what women are looking for in society, and that most people, especially women who have been through actual abuse or other things in the past, are going to see this as very problematic behavior and request. And so I think that's important to name. And for men to recognize that, maybe instead of like taking this out on the woman, maybe instead of, needing her to conform or be in a box to make you feel safe, maybe you need to get some therapy. Maybe you need to work on your own issues. Maybe you need to work on yourself so you feel a bit more confident and don't feel threatened all the time. The list goes on. But that's kind of where I land on this. I don't think she published it, but
his demands do scream insecure to me. Yeah. But I will say, I get what you're saying about how this kind of controlling behavior can be a precursor to abuse, but it's certainly not like necessarily, and I know you weren't saying it is, some people just have very, want to have a very strict relationship, like the whole Mike Pence rule thing, right? And I personally don't mesh with that. But like, I think if two people want to do that, it's like their relationship, their rules, figure it out. So if he wants to have some extreme rules, extreme boundaries in his relationship, I mean, I don't, not that there's no problem with it, but it's just no one else's business. To me, it just really should have just been, she shouldn't have gone along with this for more than a few weeks when she realized that she wanted, that he was like this. Or as soon as she did, she should have just said, we're not a good match and moved on. And then not done this kind of petty and vindictive kind of Me Too cancellation attempt is really what this is, to a guy who, from everything we know, did not abuse her. That'd be a very different story. To me, it just shows like the weaponization of social media and of personal grievances and of one-sided stories. And I just think it's harmful, because the more that you give things like this that are easy to discount, the more people will discount all the allegations and all the stories that people come out with. So yeah, look, I try. This was celebrity drama that bled into the political world, and I do think there are some interesting dynamics at play that make it different from your typical tabloid stuff. But yeah, to me, I
want to add one more caveat, which is that when you are in an abusive relationship, it often does not start off being abusive, and it often does not start off being controlling. And by the time the person does start evoking some of these behaviors and demands, sometimes people are pretty attached. They are pretty mentally broken down, emotionally broken down. Often the abuser has been kind of hurting their self-confidence for some time. So I do want to be careful that when we're talking about these things, we're not just like, well, you should leave, because sometimes it is a bit more difficult than people think to leave those kinds of situations. What I think we should say to women, though, is when somebody starts saying these things to you and making these kinds of demands, that is a red flag, and you should recognize that this is controlling behavior. And unless that is what you're looking for, you need to recognize early signs and go ahead and get out. Because I'm guessing what happened is this happened to her. She didn't leave. It probably got worse between them, and now she's bitter about it. But I think that instead of saying like he's abusive and he sucks like a year or two later, you should have just said, these were bad signs early on other women should be aware of. If you see that happening in your relationship, before you get too attached or before you get too sucked in because it will go downhill from here. Something like that would be appropriate. I still don't like sharing personal communications for this kind of thing, but I guess that's kind of where I'd leave it.